Hello, welcome to today's webinar on identifying types of leadership and power in smaller agencies. My name is Brandon Battle, Project Assistant with the IACP's Leading by Legacy program. Today's webinar is provided by the IACP's Leading by Legacy program and is made possible through the support of the Bureau of Justice Assistance and the U.S. Department of Justice. Our presenter today is Neal Rossow. Neal Rossow is a 36-year police veteran who retired as the Chief of Police for the Flat Rock, Michigan Police Department in 2014. He began his career as a cadet with Port Huron Police Department and later as a patrol officer with the Marine City Police Department. Neal spent his career in Port Huron as an officer, sergeant, and lieutenant, working in patrol until being promoted to captain. He served in various capacities during that time, including FTO, FTO coordinator, range master, and various other positions. Chief Rossow holds a master's degree and a bachelor's degree in criminal justice from Wayne State University. He is a graduate of the FBI National Academy, Session 212, and the Northwestern University Traffic Institute School of Police Staff and Command. Neal is currently the Director of Professional Development for the Michigan Association of Chiefs of Police and is a Leading by Legacy program trainer. And now I'll turn the presentation over to Neal.
Thank you, Brandon. First, I want to welcome everyone to the webinar on identifying types of leadership and power in smaller agencies. While some of you may be aware, if you're not, Leading by Legacy, the program was actually initiated by the IACP to address smaller agencies and give them opportunity to attend training. So my background is on departments ranging from 8 to 52. So some places that would be 52 would be considered a larger agency, but in my part of Michigan it is not. So what we're going to talk about today is power and leadership. First we're going to talk about power, but just to go back for a minute, if you recall, the basic definition of leadership deals with the process of influencing people, influencing them to reach goals, and other things that are important to the agency and to the organization. But what I like to say is getting people to do what you want them to do and thinking they want to do it. So while leadership is the overall ability to influence people, it is power that's the ability to control and influence their actions by using resources. And we're going to talk about 5 different styles or sources of power that we can use and are also used against us. I think that's one of the important things when you deal with power and leadership, is that it's good to understand what the sources of power are. It's also good to understand how you're influenced and how people that are above you use power, as well as people below you when it deals in followership or leading up. They also have power. Try to look at your sources of power. Power can frequently be almost situationally based on what's going on with you, and to try and build your skills a little bit and find out what power we have to use. The 5 bases of power are going to be this. We're going to talk about referent power, expert power, legitimate power, reward power, and coercive power. Referent power and expert power are considered personal power that the leader has to influence people. And legitimate, reward, and coercive power, positional power, really based a lot on your membership and location in an agency. Referent power. Referent power is based on personal feelings and attraction that people have for you as a leader. Basically, referent power is I'll do what you want me to do, and you can influence me to move along because I like you and I want you to like me. Referent power is very influential, although you need to have some responsibility with it because I lost you all together, Brandon. I got no screen.
Okay. Huh.
Oh, it's back.
Okay.
A good example of referent power would be somebody like Martin Luther King or Gandhi. Very frequently, it is charisma, and there's some responsibility built around that simply because you may or may not have done anything to get that power. And people want to follow you to be like you. A lot of examples of that in military leadership, and we'll talk about one of the military leaders seminar is over. Expert power is based on knowledge or accomplishments or your reputation. When you have expert power, people are willing to follow you simply because you may know something or have skills that they don't have based on a given situation. Experts are people that can select solutions to others, make solid judgments because they have experience, and they're the group that you would consider subject matter experts within your organization. And when you have expert power, you can easily and frequently build trust. But you need to expand on that. Expert power can be situationally based. Expert power could revolve around perhaps a SWAT team or something like that. Legitimate power. Legitimate power is the first one we're going to talk about that deals in position. And it's based on the authority that's embedded into the formal authority that you have or title. So legitimate power is based on position in the agency or rank, as we frequently call it. And when you have legitimate power, people do what you tell them to do because they know you're in a position that you have the authority to do that. It can be short-term at times because maybe unstable, maybe unpredictable, because the followers have to understand that in fact you have a right to control and influence what they have to do. So legitimate power on its own will not stand very long, simply because people only follow you because they have to, an authoritarian type leadership. Next is reward power. It's based on the leadership's ability to provide things that the followers want. So in that, as you can see from the slide, I'll do what you want me to do because you have something that you can give me. Sometimes reward power is a little bit limited in law enforcement, perhaps regionally based. For instance, in Michigan, there's no such thing as merit pay. And most of the promotions have some sort of a system where there's an element of some objectivity, but there are a lot of things that the leader can have for reward, allowing you to go to school or to attend training. It could be perhaps a transfer or an assignment to a coveted position on your agency. So there is some element of reward power, but again, similar to legitimate power and other positional powers, it will only last so long, and it may weaken at some point when you get to a point where you simply can't give people any more that they want. Coercive power, finally the fifth source of power, and really in my opinion the least desirable, but it's out there. Coercive power is based on your abilities as a leader to produce conditions that will make people want to do what you tell them to do. You have the ability to make their life miserable. You have the ability to punish them or hurt them. So the follower simply says, yeah, I'll do what you want me to do because it's a lot easier for me to do that. It can be very problematic, coercive power. It's easy or lends itself to abuse. And it can become unhealthy. It can make an agency very unhealthy, and it can make an agency somewhat dysfunctional at some point. The basic power of outcomes, we're going to talk about internalization and identification. Internalization basically is people accept influence because they feel good when they do that. They think and act and feel very similar to you two, so I internalize the power over me and get me to do what you want me to do. Identification involves people accepting the direction or influence because they identify and seek to maintain a relationship with you. So while internalization is a little bit deeper outcome, identification is very close. So it's almost similar to the idea of referent power. Well, the outcome will be based on the fact that I want to be liked by you and I want to maintain a relationship with you. Compliance. Other two outcomes are compliance and resistance. Compliance deals with people conforming to the wishes or the directives of what you do to acquire a favorable outcome. So compliance is I will do it because it's good for me to do, basically. And then resistance is no, I'm not going to do it. They may make excuses why they don't want to do it, or may stall or put up an argument. They may simply become a no person, which is certainly not where you want to be, but it is the resistance perhaps that will force you, whether you want to go or not, into a legitimate or a coercive power stop. We're going to talk a little bit more about power after we look at the clip on Joshua Chamberlain just before the Battle of Gettysburg. At the conclusion of that, we'll kind of go through the movie and see the basis of the power that they used. One of the challenges we have in a webinar is trying to introduce you to as many ideas as we can in a very short time and still provide you time to spend asking questions. So transactional leadership. Transactional leadership is how we do the vast majority of business, not only in our lives but in our organizations. It basically involves an exchange between the two people, the leader and the follower. And the transaction involves self-interest, perhaps on both parties, and the follower does what you tell them to do to gain from doing the task. Again, it could go back to some type of reward, but it's based on fairness and honesty, truth-telling, and also promise-keeping, because if we get involved in a transaction and I'm going to do what you asked me to do, that motivation is going to be based on the fact that I will, in fact, gain from the transaction that the leader and I have conducted, or if I were the leader, between me and the follower. Here's a quick diagram that talks about transactional leadership. You can see there's some element of the situation. There's certainly the leader and the follower. The place you really want to kind of be is in that area where it says focus of leadership, and we'll talk more about that when we deal with transformational leadership. But where you are in transactional leadership is that little blue line at the bottom where I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine kind of thing, to put it at a simpler form. So simply an exchange between the leader and the follower, and that's how most of the things we do are done in an agency, is through a transaction between the two. The motivation for that is extrinsic, meaning it's outside our relationship, and the power comes from the simple fact that you can exercise influence over me. Transformational leadership. Transforming thoughts, which lead to formulating a higher purpose, which proceeds to dictate our actions, and thus our actions become character determining habits, shaping life and setting the course of the future. The idea of transformational leadership is to try and get into the follower's head and say, hey, we need to do this because it's important to our community, it's important to the organization. It becomes an intrinsic motivation, meaning the motivation comes from inside the person because I reach in there and I try to get that out of them. Transformational leadership, you've seen in the past, again, a lot of military leaderships situations are based on transformational leadership. We're not going to show up, but if any of you are familiar with the movie We Are Soldiers, when the colonel speaks to the troops before they go to Vietnam for their first introduction to combat, he uses transformational leadership by making them a promise. If you remember that A, he'll be the first one on the battlefield and the last one off, and B, no one will get behind, and he even adds dead or alive. Transformational leaders kind of reach into their people's head to get them thinking about more than the day-to-day job duties that they do. In policing, it may be adding things that talk about the nobility of our profession. Transformational leadership at this point in time, I think, is very critical based on what's going on in our communities and across this country. So it deals with trying to get them to a higher purpose, trying to maybe even say, hey, this is why you entered this profession. We're still a talented, noble group that do what we need to do to protect our communities, and frankly, as kind of an editorial note, as I travel the country teaching, while we are certainly under the microscope at this point in time, I have not heard any police officers that I run into that talk about not answering the call or running to the sound of the gun, as Colonel Grossman would say. So we're still a very noble lot, and I think that not only do organizations need transformational leadership, but the individual at times, I think, deals in trying to transcend what's going on here in our professional lives. Before we talk about the movie, you'll see some really good examples of transformational leadership in Colonel Joshua Chamberlain. You'll see that he looks at trying to reshape their lives of the Second Maine, and you'll see that he sets a course for the future. And we'll talk about that after the movie as well as how. For those of you who don't know who Joshua Chamberlain is, Joshua Chamberlain, in my opinion, is one of the first citizen soldiers that we hear about during the Civil War. He is the colonel, or the leader of the 20th Regiment of Maine. They have seen combat. They've been together for about a year, and at the point in time that this video clip is, the clip is an inspirational speech or motivational speech given to him by a group, and just prior to the Battle of Gettysburg, and if you know history at all, a lot of historians believe the Battle of Gettysburg was fundamental in switching the course of the Civil War between the North and the South. So Colonel Chamberlain and the 20th Maine are part of the Army of Potomac, and they're moving towards where they think the Army Northern Virginia is traveling, led by Robert E. Lee. Now, Colonel Chamberlain, his background is that of a college instructor, a teacher at Bowdoin College, where he's a teacher of philosophy and rhetoric. So he has no background in military leadership at all, but he has a sense of what good leaders do and how good leaders act. And he spends a lot of time studying military tactics and leading men into combat. And he was so popular in his area that he was originally voted to be the colonel of the 20th Maine when it was formed, but he understood that he did not have the skills at that time, so there was a graduate of West Point in the 20th Maine that he urged them to vote for. But at the time that this is happening, that original colonel is gone, and Joshua Chamberlain has been promoted to run the 20th Maine. What happens is about a month before this clip is, there's a group called the 2nd Maine. Now the 2nd Maine's been around for 2 years, and somehow when the 2nd Maine enlists, some of them sign up for a 2-year enlistment, some of them sign up for a 3. So at the end of the 2 years, the 2nd Maine's been in a lot of combat. They've been in a lot of engagements. They've lost a lot of their men. But they learned that half of the remaining people in the 2nd Maine signed a 3-year agreement and have to stay when their friends go home. So the people in the 2nd Maine, the soldiers in the 2nd Maine, simply mutiny. They drop their arms and refuse to fight. Now, under normal circumstances, that would lead to probably people being shot for mutiny. However, there's 120 of them. There's 120 of the members of the 2nd Maine that are now being forced from point A to point B and refusing to fight. I'm sure at some point one of the generals in the Army of the Potomac says, we need to figure out what to do with these people, and someone within listening distance says, hey, are you aware that there's another Maine unit here? So they decide to send the 120 mutineers excuse me, to the 20th Maine. Now the mutineers are disgruntled. They're a group that know how to do their job but are now refusing to, because somehow they feel they've been tricked. They have no faith in their leadership, and they are actually taken by bayonet point and forced to go to where the 20th Maine are at. They have no desire to be with the 20th Maine any more than any other unit at that point in time. Now, if you've read the book Killer Angels or you've seen the entire movie, you know that the first thing that Colonel Chamberlain does is he addresses the grievances from their unofficial leader, Private Buckland. He also asks them when the last time they've eaten, which is brilliant. If you think about being back in college and studying that crazy Maslow hierarchy of needs thing, the first need is for food, shelter, and needs to survive in your life. So first thing he does is he says, I will feed you, which begins building trust with the men. So he listens to grievances. In the clip you're going to see, he finally approaches the members of the 2nd Maine. He really needs to at least get their cooperation in getting them from point A to point B. You'll see he'll exercise all 5 of the sources of power that we talked about, and you'll also see what he uses to become a transformational leadership. If you look at the idea that to transform is to make a great change in someone's character or belief, then certainly Colonel Chamberlain was able to do that. If you don't know the story about Colonel Chamberlain in the 20th Maine, he speaks to 120 mutineers. What he does is he gains their trust, first by feeding them, then by explaining to them who they are, and what he ultimately does is he reminds them why they entered the Army to fight in the Civil War. He reminds them of the cause. So he actually, depending on the account that you read, he convinces 105 of them immediately to agree to pick up arms and fight with the 20th Maine during a battle that, like Colonel Chamberlain says he knows, is going to be a transformational time of the Civil War. And depending on the accounts, either all the remaining 5 or 4 of the 5 end up picking arms up during the Battle of Gettysburg. Colonel Chamberlain and his 20th Maine end up at a place called Little Round Top, which is the far left flank of the entire Union Army, the Army of Potomac, and repels the 15th Alabama and a few other Confederate units multiple times until he charges down the hill and captures them. He's a good leader to read about because he learns how to lead people in a situation he was not accustomed to. He's actually awarded the Medal of Honor at the Battle of Gettysburg. He's wounded 3 or 4 more times during the war. Eventually ends up being governor of Maine a couple times and being a huge advocate for the veterans that fought in the Civil War, because apparently they didn't do any better with their veterans than we do now. So what he does is he produces commitment to a goal, vision, and value shared by the leader and the followers. He reminds them that they're fighting for the same thing. And if you remember the clip when it starts out, you see the man talking with the beard, the older man, guiding the younger man as Colonel Chamberlain's walking over to the 2nd Maine, and the cook says, "This is so-and-so, I know his daddy's a preacher. Best darn cusser I ever met." The idea of that is the movie sets up the fact that there's a relationship between the 20th Maine and the 2nd Maine simply because they have a common source of being members of a community. Chamberlain, when he starts to talk to him, he doesn't really develop values or ideals similar to liberty and justice. He just reminds them why they're there. He also tells them he's in charge. He makes there's no mistaking at all that Colonel Chamberlain is in charge. He says, I've been told I can shoot you. Now, that's a pretty powerful statement to make, but of course he also says, I'm not going to do that. And in reality, there's no way a colonel from Maine could shoot other members of their state and go back to there. He also gives them a reason to change. He tells them during that speech that I really need you to fight with us. He also informs them he doesn't have enough people to guard them. Their force is down so low. His only ability to be successful in combat as they travel towards Gettysburg, the ultimate location of that battle, that he needs their help. And he understands that he needs to transform their thinking. Transformation is somewhat situationally based, like I said, and he has to do it. He also builds their trust by saying, we're a different kind of army, we're special, we're noble. And he also says a couple of things that are really important to transform their ideas and get them to fight for him. He says, we're down to half strength and we need you. No doubt about that, he says. We need you. In order to be successful, we need you. And at the end of it, he says, if you choose to come with us, I'll be personally grateful. So he builds even more trust by saying, look, this is important to me, and I will value your support as we move along. So he does arouse a strong sense of purpose. Like I said, he gets 105 immediately to say, yeah, we're going to do that. Ironically enough, Colonel Chamberlain's brother Tom is a lieutenant in his unit, one of his adjutants, and he goes to Colonel Chamberlain with much glee saying, hey, I don't know what you said, but they're going to fight with us, and he says, how many? And Tom says 105, and then Tom says, but we don't have enough rifles. And Colonel Chamberlain, being very much the realist, says, don't worry about that. We'll eventually have rifles for them. He creates respect and trust. The trust starts with feeding them, and it's expanded by the fact that, look, we've been in battle too. We've had our friends die too, but we have a stronger cause. We're different than any kind of army in history in that we're fighting to set men free. We're not fighting to gain something for ourselves. We're fighting for a very, very noble cause. And then he simply says, hey, talk among yourselves and decide what you want to do. He needs to trust them, because when they go together to fight the Army of Northern Virginia, he needs their followership and their respect and trust. So what happens is transformational leadership deals with getting extraordinary performance and getting them to put that intrinsically into their mind and into, for lack of a better term, into their hearts and their souls. There are conditions that work good for transformational leadership. One of the reasons that when I instruct, I frequently use clips from movies, more frequently than not, the Army or war movies, and then occasionally sports movies too, like Remember the Titans, because it shows leadership and followership and how you use power over it. Obviously, when the 2nd Maine is turned over to Colonel Chamberlain, they're in a crisis. They're unstable, and certainly they're past mediocrity. Their performance has gone way beyond mediocrity to a point that they're mutinying and refusing to fight. They're obviously disenchanted. If you've read the book Killer Angels, which I recommend, Killer Angels by Shara, is a very well-written historical fiction on the Battle of Gettysburg. It goes into all the characters involved and talks about their leadership styles and their issues. And in that book or in the movie, you see that the followers are simply done. They don't trust the Army anymore because somehow they signed a 3-year agreement, and they somehow have been led by people that don't know how to lead men into combat. If you know anything about the Civil War at this point in time, President Lincoln has had a lot of trouble trying to find a leader for the Army of Potomac, and has gone through many generals, and at this time has just recently assigned Colonel George Meade to run the Army of the Potomac. Chamberlain also offers them future opportunity. If you remember in that clip, he says, first he says, you have to come with me, you know, and if you don't want to fight, then he still gives them some hope in saying that he'll speak on their behalf and help things as best they can. But he also says, if you fight with us, if you're willing to fight with the 20th Maine as members of this unit, then we will simply forget that all of this happened. And I think that may have been just a little bit of the decision-making with the members of the 2nd Maine, but I really feel that they just trusted Colonel Chamberlain and were willing to follow him anywhere. They also developed and communicate a vision, which he obviously did. He used some unconventional strategies by simply saying it was going to be like Ali Oxenfree if they followed him and fought with them instead of having to be guarded. He told them that if they lost this battle, they may lose the war. He showed that he was very concerned about the 2nd Maine, again, by somehow brilliantly knowing to feed them, and then saying, you need to be part of this, and this is why, and maybe take just 1 minute and get together with yourselves and remember that there is a noble cause here that we're willing to fight for. And Colonel Chamberlain simply does demonstrate self-sacrifice when he talks to the members of the 2nd Maine, but also during the Battle of Gettysburg, he's wounded and refuses to leave the field as long as his men are under arms. Transformational leadership is the key to leaving your legacy. The idea of leading by legacy is founded on the idea that when you leave your agency, you will leave a legacy. And our approach is to say, hey, if you're going to leave a legacy, then you have a point in time in your career from this day on until you leave that agency that you can impact it and leave a positive legacy. Transformational leaders are also very much leadership-based as opposed to management-based, but those of you that have courses in management as it deals with leadership understand that a good leader does need some management skills. For instance, Colonel Joshua Chamberlain could not have gone into battle at the Battle of Gettysburg without the stuff his people needed. He needed to engage the intrinsic ideas of why they were there, but he also needed the rifles and the ammunition and things. There's a clear link to your legacy as a transformational leader, because the transformational, you'll see the slide says, transformational leader is the organization that he leads. There's no separation in people's eyes, as the 2nd Maine people viewed the 20th Maine as not a group of people from Maine, but they viewed him as Colonel Joshua Chamberlain and his followers. Back to the power real quick. I won't belabor this because I'm sure you're watching for it when we watch the clip. He very talentedly uses referent power, and he certainly ends up there. He says, we've been in combat, and we have things very similar to this, and I'd really like you to follow us. And referent leaders have trust. He uses expert leadership and the fact that he talks to them about the engagements they've been in and why they all got there. He certainly has legitimate power because he's a colonel, and frankly, they're not. and really, the line that he starts off is, I've been told if you don't come, I can shoot you. And then he says, but you'll come. Whether you fight or not, you will come with me. Reward power is there because he simply says, if you do fight with us, I will. This won't be brought up again. If you choose to fight with us, none of this will be brought up again. And he even offers some reward power for those that may have chosen not to raise arms again, and said, I'll work for you as an advocate as best I can. And he also uses coercive power, but only minimally, like I said in the beginning. I can shoot you. I don't think there's a power style any more coercive than I can shoot you. So we'll open it up to questions. I think Brandon told you how to do that before, and I'll wait and see if we have any appear, I guess, for lack of a better term. While you all are doing that, if you do have any questions, please feel free to submit them to Brandon and we'll answer them. If you have any questions later, you'll see my contact information on the next slide. You can contact me and I can go directly with you via email.
It looks like there's no questions, so thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. A recording of today's presentation will be posted on the IACP's Leading by Legacy website at www.theicp.org/LBL webinars. And today's webinar is also a part of the Leading by Legacy webinar series, so be sure to attend our next webinar on Wednesday, September 7th at 1 p.m. on maneuvering in the political environment. And it's presented by another Leading by Legacy trainer, Chief David Kurz of the Durham, New Hampshire Police Department. So thank you everyone for attending today's webinar, and feel free to contact us if you have any questions in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brandon.